Welcome to another episode of the Dr. Jeff Experience. I'm so glad that you decided to join us this evening. And man, let me tell you, we've got something that is so important that everybody should be in tune with. We're going to talk tonight about environmental and climate justice. Now, years ago, we used to hear that and we thought that, this had to do with tree huggers or that sort of thing. We envision hippies and the peace movement and all that. But let me tell you something. Environmental and climate, it's really injustice is what we're dealing with. And we want to make sure that you know what's really going on behind this environmental and climate justice movement. It is hurting so many communities, especially poor minority communities. We often hear about gun violence and drugs and all types of crime, but we never really hear about what's going on environmentally. I can recall in one of the neighborhoods I lived in Jersey, it was called a cancer cluster because of so many electric lines that they had the electromagnetic fields. I even had something called a Gauss meter that the electric company let me use to see how much electricity was radiating in those areas, because I fought this fight about no more building of electrical wires in our neighborhood. So tonight we're going to talk about that. But first of all, before we bring our guest in, which is a powerful guest, we're so fortunate to have our audience. What is environmental justice? And environmental justice is the idea that all people and communities have the right to live and thrive in safe, healthy environments with equal environmental protections and meaningful involvement in these actions. In other words, we ought to be able to live and breathe good air, a good, healthy climate. Black communities continue to live close to natural gas facilities and will continue to have a high cancer risk without pollutant levels being mitigated through the operation of this proposed rule. Air in many Black communities already violates various air quality standards, and at least 6.7 million Black people live near oil refineries. We see what's going on with our water, Jackson, Mississippi. You see what's happening in New York. You see what's happening all over the place with water. Environmental justice is about people in Detroit, Ohio, Chicago, Memphis, Kansas City, and elsewhere who have died, and others who are chronically ill because of exposure to toxins. Climate change is the new normal of more severe storms like Hurricane Sandy and Isaac, which devastated communities from Boston to Biloxi. Our sisters and brothers in the Bahamas and Inuit communities in Carolina, Alaska, and communities in Thibodaux, Louisiana, and beyond, they will risk losses to rising sea levels in the next few years. We've got to get a hold of what's called this thing called climate change and environmental climate justice. There is a group of people at the Bullard Center, we're going to learn more about that, who are at the forefront of dealing with climate change, environmental and climate injustice. And we are fortunate and blessed tonight to have one of those professionals in the forefront, as a frontline soldier tonight, Dr. Liza Powers. Let me bring her on. Dr. Liza, how are you? Thank you so much.
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you. So, Dr. Liza, I just gave a little brief synopsis of what's happening with this environmental and climate injustice in poor minority communities and the importance of knowing more about this. I can recall one of the worst things I've ever seen, and no matter what side of the fence people are on politically, I must bring this out. When Donald Trump became president, one of the first things he did through executive decision was to cut back on regulations with the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. Now, what that basically did was, to put it in other terms, was taking guns and bullets and put it in poor minority communities and said, here, because that's basically the same thing. Because when you cut back on the EPA and regulatory laws that go with that, what you basically said to the big guys in the environmental world, those factories and all of that, said, go ahead, you go ahead. We're cutting back on legislation on that. So you go ahead and put all the smoke into the areas. Go ahead and pollute the lakes and the ponds and the communities. Go ahead. We're going to cut back on what you're doing. So don't even worry about it. Even the cleaning of poultry and meats and foods and all that kind of stuff. The EPA inspects poultry, meats and dairies, all of that, farms. So, okay, I said enough. Dr. Liza, tell us about you. Tell us about you, yourself, your background, and then let's talk about the Bullard Center.
Okay. I'm actually from a small town on the Texas-Louisiana border. I grew up in Texas. I went to Stephen F. Austin State University and graduated with a history degree. And eventually, when I relocated to Houston, I made the decision to study at Texas Southern University. They had a great urban planning and environmental policy program. And so the study of urban development, city planning had always really interested me. It was through the works of reading up on Dr. Bullard and some of the things there that got me interested in environmental policy. So I didn't originally start out thinking, you know what, let me study environmental policy. But the more I read and the more I understood about it, the more angry I got at, the disparities that are occurring.
So this wasn't your original purpose or your original focus.
No, I really just wanted to study something in urban development. But like I said, I started reading up on Dr. Bullard's work and other people's work. And my dissertation topic was mitigating transportation disasters during extreme flooding. So I looked at different flooding events that occurred in the Houston area. I specifically looked at Harris County, which is Houston is in, because we've had a lot of different memorable storms. The last large one was in 2017. It was Hurricane Harvey. And even what they found from the research of that is that Black and brown communities are more likely to experience flood devastation and pollution from the floodwaters. They're more likely to experience the contamination from that. And this is all policies that were put in place almost 100 years ago with redlining. And even though redlining has become illegal 50 years ago, we are still dealing with that policy and how it has impacted communities of color. Yeah, absolutely.
That's unreal. So as you went further into your research, you connected to the Bullard Center.
Yes. So I was hired on at the Bullard Center 2 years ago. Dr. Bullard was actually one of the people on my dissertation committee. So he got to see my writing and help kind of mentor me in that regard. And I was basically approached and they said, we've got to really look at energy security and things that are going on in communities of color in terms of natural gas, oil, and coal. And so for the past couple of years, I've been working at the Bullard Center looking at liquefied natural gas. and its impact on communities of color. It took me to Freeport, Texas, and Plaquemines Parish, Louisiana, which is the toe of Louisiana. It's 55 miles south of New Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
So we've worked with communities all over the Gulf Coast as they kind of resist that build out. Some of them are under construction. Some of them are trying to expand. And it's happened at an alarming pace. In 2006, it was just kind of a pipe dream. Let's retrofit some of these 4 import facilities that we have. And we've more than tripled the amount of export facilities since then. And of course, any sort of policies or looks at anything are just a formality when you look at what the federal government does. President Bill Clinton actually issued an executive order while he was president, so that was in the 90s, that all federal departments were supposed to incorporate environmental justice practices in any sort of decision-making or regulatory practices that they did.
Wow.
Yeah, we're in 2024, and that is still not really on the forefront of these agencies' minds. Unfortunately, there wasn't any sort of funding that went with that. Now, President Biden, many of you may have heard about the Justice 40 initiative. So he issued an executive order. When you look at funding, 40% of it should go to communities that are fence line communities or communities impacted by these types of situations. So we're hoping to see some improvement. Of course, that's it's not as fast as we would want. I mean, Dr. Bullard initially started this work in the late 70s. His wife was actually suing a waste management facility in Houston, Texas, and she sued on the grounds of civil rights because they were locating the facility in a middle-class Black American neighborhood. And almost all of the city incinerators, landfills, everything was located in communities of color or Black American neighborhoods. And at that time, only 25% of the population was actually Black Americans. So they were shouldering almost all of the burden when they only represented 25% of the total population. Sorry. And in today's world, Black Americans are 75% more likely than others to live near hazardous waste facilities. So these things haven't changed in terms of the numbers. There are still lots of things that need to be done to fix that.
Wow. Dr. Liza, we look and we see now some of the language that is being utilized in politics, and we look at the whole subject of fracking.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about that and how that affects us?
So I will say that fracking is this new technology that came out. It's unconventional is the term they use, in which they go into the sediment rock to extract oil and gas. And it's not uncommon for there to be abandoned wells that are still leaking pollution once they're kind of done with the job. They don't do the best job cleaning up, but those geographies in which they're operating those fracking, children living close to fracking sites have 2 to 3 times a higher risk of leukemia. And you also see air pollution and other things like that will impact reproduction You have children that are being born premature, underweight, or stillborn. And Black American women are more likely to experience this. They are harmed the most from this.
Wow. Again, as I talked about earlier, I lived in what was known as a cancer cluster. They tried to tell us that these electric lines did not emit enough electromagnetic fields to cause this, but everybody in the neighborhood was dying of cancer.
Right.
So you couldn't tell us that something wasn't wrong. We knew something was wrong.
Right.
During humid weather, you could always hear the electric line sizzling. So you knew that something was going on in the neighborhood. We talk about disparity by design when we're talking about environmental and climate justice. And the situation didn't come by accident.
No.
But as a result of deliberate political choices by rich countries, as with the many present-day geopolitical problems, once you start looking back in time to find the reasons why, it's not long before you arrive at European colonialism. And the wealth of European and North American economies was created in large by extracting land, resources, and manpower from countries in Africa, South America, and Asia, creating this vast economic inequality which so defines the world today. Even after formal decolonization, this extractive economic model was maintained by powerful companies whose supply chains stretch across borders, showing little respect for either local communities or the environment. One of the things that I often tell people, we are in such a rush to go get these iPhones, not knowing what's happening about where these iPhones come from and the environmental injustice that takes place with that.
Right.
So let's talk about the Bullard Center.
Okay. So Dr. Bullard founded it in 2021. And our focus, we have several different priority projects. Oh, good. You're pulling it up on the website. We have several different programs that we have. We, of course, work with the Justice 40 program. We also have an environmental career worker training program in which we train participants so that they can get job placement in the energy sector to help kind of clean things up. We also have something known as the Community Environmental Leadership Program. That is a summer institute in which community leaders across the Texas coastal communities participate and exchange ideas, exchange healthy dialogue, create story maps about their communities to help with advocacy measures. I help with energy security issues and energy justice issues because they impact Black American communities so heavily. Like I said about the children more likely to have leukemia that are surrounded by fracking sites. There's all sorts of ways in which this has impacted people in terms of the displacement. So there's two ways that people are being displaced. One is simply from climate, all of the extractive activities of taking out all this oil and gas and drilling for more and getting more and more and more has definitely created our climate crisis, in which now you have people that are forced to relocate. One of the community leaders that I worked with liquefied natural gas has relocated twice due to the climate, and he thinks it's only a matter of time. He's a fisherman. It's only a matter of time where he'll have to actually relocate a third time. But you also have the displacement from eminent domain. Probably the most impactful stories that I've heard from that came from Freeport, Texas. I work with several community leaders. There was a redlined neighborhood. It was essentially a sundown town in the 1930s. The city passed a municipal code and required that Black Americans only live in the East End neighborhood.
Wow.
Yeah. So for many years, they were supposed to live there. Well, that was the 1930s, right before World War II started rolling out. Dow Chemical moved in across the river from the East End community. And they talk about seeing yellow dust all on their houses. They talk about their dads coming back from working there and having the dust like in their clothing, and no one was telling them that sulfur was bad, right? So they're just coming in and out of the house, and it's just everywhere that they're breathing. And if that's not enough that they're just constantly polluted from that, of course, having Dow Chemical move across the river from them started to devalue their property. And all of a sudden, what you also start to see is after their property is starting to be devalued, they're halting public services to them. They're not upkeeping their streets, and different things. And by the 1990s, the port decided that they needed that land. So after they were forced to live there in the 1930s, and they've established a well-established community, thriving businesses, places of worship, community-centered, they're being told that they're being forced out of their homes. And so that displacement probably, it bothered me a lot. It bothered me a lot, to say the least. So,
I'm sorry. That's one of the terrible things that we see about this. Not only do you have this environmental and climate injustice, but it just takes a whole nother level. You force people to live in toxic areas.
Yes.
And then after they have inhaled, transferred all of those toxins into the house, spread it all over the place. A lot of people have died from it. Then you tell them that you want their land. And you give them pennies on the dollar.
Pennies. So the money that these people got from that, they couldn't go find them a new house, that they could afford. They'd already devalued it so much, and then they have to give them a fair trade. They have to give them a fair dollar amount, and that dollar amount is $10,000, $20,000. That's not even a down payment for a new house.
Yeah.
They did offer them some housing. They were like, you know what? We're going to offer you some housing. It's going to be just as good as what you got here. And they promised them a garage. It was a carport. Their community, they had never flooded before. Now they're in 100-year floodplain. And those that went to that neighborhood that the port found for them. So it's never equitable, and it's never just.
So let's get this scenario so that people can picture it. This neighborhood was in a toxic area. They were inhaling and breathing in toxic wastes, toxic substances. And then these factories come in and say, okay, we want your land, and we take it through eminent domain because it's for the good of the public, supposedly. And then they move them to a toxic area where now they're not dealing with a toxic substance, but they're in a floodplain area.
Right. Well, and actually, unfortunately, that whole entire area is non-attainment for ozone. it's one of the community members says it's like chemical soup because you have all of these different refineries. You've got Dow, which is got its largest petro complex right in that neighborhood. You've got the liquefied natural gas now facility there. And of course, they're wanting to build it's called the Spot Terminal. So it's a classic case of being overburdened, and it's almost cookie cutter to the point where it just makes your stomach crawl,
My God.
because you can see it across the different communities, especially along the Gulf Coast of the U.S., which is primarily the neighborhoods that I look at. But of course, this isn't unique to the U.S. Gulf Coast, of course, that you've got it in all pockets of neighborhoods across the country. It's just you really see the legacy of Jim Crow South when you start to look at what's going on, in some of these communities.
So let me ask you, Dr. Liza, through your research and your involvement in this area, why is it that this has not hit mainstream media and it's not, for lack of a better terms, as sexy as some of the other talking points that are out there?
Well, I will have to say that it has become more mainstream, and that is through the efforts of grassroots organizers. I give all of them the credit in the world. I can't even imagine what it's like to be disempowered and disenfranchised generation after generation. And then for them to, they're busy. I mean, they have work, they're raising kids, they're facing, not only is this, it's almost like a it isn't like, it really is a David and Goliath story, because they're going against these industries that are, favored by the government. It's almost like they have to do the burden of proof rather than the industry. The industry just says, I'm going to promise some jobs, and those jobs aren't going to the people in that community. Look at Port Arthur, Texas. It's got one of the highest concentrations of Black Americans in Texas. It has one of the higher unemployment rates. My family worked in Port Arthur. They were part of that drive-in, drive-out community that goes, they do the work, they get the paycheck, and then they leave Port Arthur. They're not staying there. So that employment is not going to local people. In Freeport, going back to them, there was an explosion at that LNG facility in June. It was June 8th, 2022. And so, of course, months later, they come out with the report. PHMSA does a public meeting only because the community members in Freeport demanded it. And they said, oh, well, one of the main reasons this occurred was because of workers. We were short workers and there was some worker fatigue. Well, why are you getting millions of dollars of tax breaks from the local community? But you don't have enough employees to help run the facility. And this is school children. It's education. These school children are losing out. Not only are they losing out on, the funding that would help give them state-of-the-art education or, give them the potential to be the next Albert Einstein, but they're breathing in this polluted air. So some of these communities have some of the worst air toxins that they're breathing in as school children, which is also impacting their mental and physical health.
My God. So Dr. Liza, this is so good. Listen, guys, you need to be tapping into your friends, your relatives. Let them know that we are streaming live through YouTube, live through Facebook, and through LinkedIn. You want any questions, any comments, let people know what we're talking about. We're talking about environmental and climate justice and injustice. And we've got a special guest, Dr. Liza, who is here with us tonight. and she's from the Bullard Center, and she is just a wonderful source on what it is that we're talking about tonight. So tell your friends if they have any questions to go ahead and feel free to send in your comments, your questions. But Dr. Liza, I want to ask you, so I see that the Bullard Center is affiliated with Texas Southern University. Tell me how that
Yes.
works.
Well, actually, Dr. Bullard was a professor at Texas Southern University when he helped with the Beam versus Southwestern waste management lawsuit that I mentioned earlier in the 70s. So he was a professor, he was a sociologist, and of course, that work took him elsewhere. But then he returned back to Texas Southern University to continue, his research, and he to teach future environmental leaders. And so he established the center at that university. It was very important to him that it was at an HBCU.
So through that, are young people, well, everyone, open to everyone? Is this a part of the curriculum at Texas Southern? Is this a degree program?
So we do have it with the both a master's and doctoral studies. Right now, there isn't an undergraduate program with the urban planning department. That is something that potentially will happen in the future. But right now, it's a master's and doctoral study program.
Wow, and how's that been going?
It's great. I'm one of the products of that program. So it's rigorous, and it shifted my axis. Like, I completely really reconsidered colonized thought. I taught history for from the time I got my master's. I would teach at a community college part-time. And even the way I taught my students about United States history, I noticed at the early stages of my career, I taught what I read, which our textbooks are very, very colonized thinking. So that was what I appreciated most from the program, is a shift in the narrative or a shift in thought, and very appreciative of the lessons that I learned in that space to do so at Texas Southern.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Liza, so let me ask you, as you continue on in this fight for environmental justice and climate justice, what do you see, or what is it that you can tell our audience, the things that we can do? I know something as small as when I moved here to Georgia, I'm a small town farmer. I have fruit trees and plants and vegetables, all that sort of stuff. And one of the things that I learned to do was to have my soil tested. There we go.
Okay, I was just sending you a message.
As we speak about environmental justice, so we just had a power surge in my area, and everything went awry. Wow.
You know, crazy thing about that, power surges and power outages are 4 times more likely to happen in predominantly communities of color than in neighborhoods with predominantly white populations.
Wow.
Yeah. Any way you slice and dice it, from transportation, housing, health, it's so unfortunate.
Well, you just had a perfect example of it. This is the first time this has ever happened, to the point
Oh,
where it's
wow.
like, oh man, what do we do here?
Yes.
So going forward, Dr. Liza, and thank God, I thank these everyone for tuning in. We have some people coming in late. Yeah, some people coming in late, but they're tuning in. And great information, all of that. So let me ask you a question. Going forward, what do we tell the public? What is the ask of you to the public to help in this fight?
Well, I feel as if EJ communities are already, shouldering the fight. They're the ones that are doing that. I will say that use of plastics is really impacting communities of color. It's globally an issue, but if you think about some of these refinery communities, that they are, bearing the brunt so that we can live a life of convenience. So anytime that you can reduce and reuse is optimal. It's just really important to also, if you have the opportunity to grow food sources, that is also a great starting off point. Be in tune to what's going on in your community and use your voice. Understand your rights to participate in public forums, and continue the fight, the good fight, because so many. It's really the communities that are impacted that are usually the loudest, because they're the ones that are impacted by it. And so because of their voices, that's why you and I are sitting here talking about this tonight. It is those grassroots fence line community organizers. Yes, Karen, definitely recycling helps.
Yeah, again, people, here's what gets me. So, and this is when the comments start coming in, because I step up on my platform, but it's okay. So we are, as you have talked about, poor minority communities are the most affected by environmental and climate injustice. And it's those communities that are less aware of their contributions to the injustice that is killing us. For instance, if we took a survey of how many religious institutions, whether it be churches or rabbis or mosques, how many of them recycle? I'm sure it would be minimal.
Yes.
And does, because there's an argument that a lot of people, I always get into this conversation, I'm not going to say argument, about, well, I don't think recycling actually works, because all they do is throw it in the trash anyway. Does recycling help?
It helps, but really we're gonna have to change the narrative. We're really gonna have to relook at things, and we're gonna really have to tackle the companies that are also doing this. So I think we're going to have to change some of the things that we previously thought were okay. And that's difficult to think about on a daily basis.
Can you give me an example of that?
Well, for instance, recently in the news, they've talked about gas stoves and how they've contributed to children's asthma and different health disparities. And, there's been a lot of people in an uproar, a tizzy about that, like, I don't want you taking away my gas stove.
Oh, man, let me tell you, I'm one of those. I cook on an electric stove now, but if I had my choice and I could snap my fingers, it would be gas.
Yeah, but there's this need to evolve. We need to really think about things from a just transition of energy to clean energy. Back in the day, we were using kerosene lamps, and we've evolved from that, and we've sort of been told this narrative that we've moved away from coal, so we're okay now. Like, this is natural gas is clean energy, but it's in fact not. So it's really important to look at the policies that are in place now and really ask yourselves those hard-hitting questions. Are they really how are they impacting the communities where the production and extraction are taking place?
Yeah.
And you get distracted by a lot of white noise because those industries have a lot of money in their pocketbooks because they aren't having to pay taxes like we are. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they have all this money to spin the story to make even more money.
Correct.
And so they've touted it as this clean energy where, everything's sunshine and rainbows. And it's essentially methane, and methane traps in the atmosphere is itself a problem for our climate, and it's a problem for our respiratory and cardiovascular health. It contributes to so many problems.
What are some of the things that contribute to methane gas?
So what do you? I didn't understand your question.
So what are some of the? I guess, where does methane gas come from?
Yeah, so that's from that fracking. They're bringing that in. But even so what happened is they found when they found this way to unconventionally extract it, instead of being conservative with the resources, they just kept extracting more and more and more. And there was this glut. What do we do with this glut? You know what? We're going to be an energy secure country, and we're going to use this to sell overseas. And so it became this big thing. And in order to ship it overseas, to reduce the volume, they wanted to make it into liquid. So they literally take the gas and they freeze it to negative 260 degrees. So it becomes a liquid form. But that's an extra step. You've already fracked it out. Then you have these pipelines where it's basically, and so now we've taken this pollution and we're stirring the pot. Let's get it some more into these new communities.
Wow.
And for what gain? It's when people are saying, we need to transition to clean energy, there's fossil fuel industries have said, you know what we need to do? We just need to worry about the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We just need to capture it and just clean up a bit. So now they've got this plan that's being touted as the answer. This is the answer to all our problems. We'll just take this, and so we're putting it into pipelines. But there was a town in Mississippi that experienced a leak from this type. So it was they were in Mississippi, and they're essentially living their day one day, and it basically their cars seize up. Because there's not enough oxygen in the air. Like, these first responders can't even come and help these people that are breathing in all this carbon dioxide because it had spewed or leaked from the pipeline.
Serious.
So they can't even. I'll see if I can find that and send that in a link to you. But that if that's the potential, like, we're just creating more and more problems, not solutions, to this issue.
So yeah, just what you were talking about. I saw that, and I saw how they were going to capture this, and that kind of piggybacked on certain farming techniques that I was looking at, where they're talking about no-till and not adding too much CO2 to the atmosphere.
Right.
I want to urge all of our listeners that as we have this type of conversation, you need to continue to do more and more research on what we're talking about, because the talking points that we have heard is always in the news is about abortion. And I'm not minimizing these things, but it's about abortion. It's about whether the two presidential candidates have enough cognitive sense to even become the president. And we get inundated with this. We get inundated about racial disparities. We get inundated with all these things, but we don't talk about the very thing that is killing us day by day by day. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to take a look at, from the local level all the way up to the federal level, those who are in office, those who are running for office, to see what their plans are for environmental and climate justice. What do they even know about it? What are their plans about it? Are they educating themselves about it? Do they know anything about the Bullard Center and all that that takes place at your location? We've got to start asking these questions. And I think that what you're doing at the Bullard Center and Texas Southern University is tremendous. I'm going to try to pull up that link and try to share it.
Yeah, and while you're doing that, I wanted to kind of piggyback on what you said there. So we in Texas have all of our agencies every 5 years have to have what is known as a sunset review. Are they doing a good job? What's going on? So a couple of years ago, our environmental agency, which is known as TCEQ, Texas Commission for Environmental Quality, a lot of people went to Austin to that meeting. There was a neighborhood, it's a historically Black American neighborhood, 5th Ward, Houston went. They are a cancer cluster thanks to Southern Pacific and other rail yard operations. They're asking these questions about what do you incorporate in with environmental justice. And the head of TCEQ himself said, "What is environmental justice?" And that's the problem.
Wow.
Why is the burden of introducing all of these on the people? Why are you the head of an environmental agency for the state of Texas not knowing what, these are the battles.
The head of the environmental agency did not know.
Yes.
What environmental justice was.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Wow. Let me share this, because this article is exactly what we're talking about. Ladies and gentlemen, you got to see this. So let me make sure I am pronouncing this right. It says, how do you say that?
A town in Mississippi. That's how I pronounce it.
A town in Mississippi.
That is how I pronounce it.
February 22nd, 2020. A clear Saturday after weeks of rain Damaris the Braves Burns, his brother and cousin, decided to go fishing. They were heading home in a red Cadillac when they heard a boom and saw a big white cloud shooting into the evening sky. Burns' first thought was a pipeline explosion. He didn't know what was filling the air, but he called his mom to warn her to get inside. They gathered the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, watching from the big bedroom, from their back bedroom. They didn't come, Brown says. 10 minutes, I knew they would have been there in 5 minutes, but they didn't come. Talking about paramedics. Little did she know her sons and nephew were just down the road in their car, unconscious, victims of a mass poisoning from a carbon dioxide pipeline rupture. As the carbon dioxide moved through the rural community, more than 200 people evacuated and at least 45 people were hospitalized. Cars stopped working, hobbling emergency response. People lay on the ground, shaking and unable to breathe. First responders didn't know what was going on. It looked like you were going through the zombie apocalypse, says the emergency director of Yazoo County. Now, 3 years after CO2 poisoning from the pipeline break, some in Satartia see the incident as a warning at a critical moment for the United States climate policy. The country is looking at a dramatic expansion of its carbon dioxide pipeline networks, thanks in part to billions of dollars of incentives in last year's climate legislation. Listen, can you imagine? Can you imagine?
We've historically been a country that is very reactive. We are not very proactive. I mean, you think back into the early 1900s. I think it was like 1911. There was a workplace disaster in New York City. It was the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, and all the doors were blocked. The ladders didn't go down to the ground. So when they were on the top floor when it, basically catches on fire, the doors, they had to open them and they, fire exits are supposed to push out, right? So you can easily get out. Your fire escape ladders need to go to the bottom floor. There's all these things now that we do because of that incident. So we're kind of one of, I guess as a country, historically, we just kind of have to have something like that happen. And then we're like, oh, you know what? We should have something to protect. So what we're doing with this carbon capture is we're just, you know what? We're going to do it here and here and here and here and here. And we're not going to think about like maybe making sure things are okay and working. We'll have to have a few more of those Mississippi disasters before, alarm bells ring.
That's just crazy to hear. I'm so glad that the Bullard Center is dealing with these priority projects: study of systemic racism on health and climate, Justice 40, White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council support, technical support project, the Bullard Center for Environmental Justice startup. These are just a few of what you guys are doing. Climate Migration Project, Historically Black College Universities Communities Worker Health and Safety Training Program, quick COVID-19 Quick Strike Project, Data to Action Project, Multi-Hazard Disaster Preparedness. I mean, this is fantastic work. I'm so glad to be able to share this information with our audience tonight. We have a question, and I often thought about this, about chemtrails. We see these airplanes and we see the white lines, this, that, and the other. And I've heard pros and cons. It's nothing more than exhaust that dissipates in the air. But then you hear the rumors about chemtrails, and so what's the whole thing about that?
Well, that isn't actually my area of expertise, but I would dare say, if I did some research on it, I mean, if it wasn't natural, like if God, a divine being such as God or whoever you believe, if they didn't create it or it wasn't naturally there,
yes. That's what I always say.
it's probably not perfect, and there's probably some problems involved.
That's so good, Dr. Liza. I always say that. Listen,
You know,
if it's man-made, there's a problem.
the best thing for our climate, trees. We didn't create them. They were already here. Wetlands, fresh water. We were provided all this stuff, and the indigenous people tried to tell those the colonizers when they came, trying to show them how to use the land and use the resources. And when they came to colonize, it was like, let's fence it in. You don't want to fence it in. Well, it's our land now. And there's all these valuable lessons that were not heeded, from.
Yeah, you're so right. When I talk, when we talk about gardening, and people say, "Oh man, there's no exercise in that," and I tell them, "Okay, you carry about 10-pound bags of dirt, off a hill, into a yard, and then have to pick them up and empty them into a raised garden bed, and then have to rake. And you got to get up early in the morning before that sun gets over those trees, because you're going to sweat bullets out there. And even now, early in the day, I was climbing the ladder trying to reach up to pick the peaches out the trees before the squirrels take my whole harvest. Let me tell you something. Early in the morning, when I go out and deal with the plants and all, I don't have enough energy to get to the gym. So what we did was we burned energy. We were healthy because we grew our own food. We exercised. We farmed. We were part of we were part of nature. We were grounded. We were out in the yards with our bare feet, so we were grounded. All of these things of nature we were a part of, and we let it go. And now we want everything fast. We want microwave this. We want microwave that. We don't read food labels. We had a show on not too long ago. A gentleman was telling us about food labels. What's organic? What's GMO? What's natural? And we don't even talk about the importance of reading food labels now to know what's in our foods that's killing us. I had an old pastor that used to tell us that, Jeff, we're digging our graves with our teeth because we're not concerned. And then for those of us I don't care what your religion is, if we talk about how much we love God or our creator, then how could we not care about what was created by the creator?
Correct.
So we got to get back to the basics. We got to get back to educating and re-educating ourselves. But the more we know, the more we have to teach.
Right.
And this is why we do what we do here, the Dr. Jeff Experience. This is why you do what you do at the Bullard Center. And I am so glad that you have been led down this path so that you can continue in your studies to educate the public about the importance of knowing what's in our ground, what's in our air. Before we leave, my God, this time went so fast. So
I know. I can't believe it.
Just give me some talking points about something you want to get over to our audience before you leave.
Well, I'd love for you guys to learn more about our research. If you head over to the Bullard Center, there's a new report that we released last month. It's called Liquefying the Gulf Coast. We partnered with Dr. Robin Saha from the University of Montana. He's the lead author on the report, and of course, Dr. Bullard. And I also helped with that research and writing. So I'd love for you guys to check it out.
Someone's teasing me about my squirrels. They know my fight with those squirrels. I had a barbecue not too long ago, and they watched families of squirrels just taking peach by peach by peach going down the fence line. Wow.
The squirrels thought you were taking their peaches.
Yeah, I know. I was. Yeah. So tell me about that report again.
So it's called Liquefying the Gulf Coast. You can find it on the Bullard Center website. It looks at how liquefied natural gas is impacting communities of color.
What's it called?
It's
Liquefying the Gulf Coast?
liquefying the Gulf Coast.
Okay.
We assess, we do a cumulative impact assessment. So we look at how it impacts people's health, how it impacts the climate. We basically do assessments that the federal government should do every time they're deciding whether or not a facility should be opened. The federal government has not denied. They keep rubber stamping and approving these projects, and it is at the expense of a lot of people's health along the Gulf Coast. We're essentially, and they're going into communities already overburdened. It's like these communities are the sacrificial lamb. They're sacrifice zones.
Wow.
And this LNG is not even staying here. It's going elsewhere. And guess what? Americans are paying more on their energy bill as a result, because now we're paying that competitive rate, which is higher because of it's the Europeans and the Asian, all are now using our energy source, and we're paying for that on our bills.
Wow. And whether we want to believe it or not, global warming is real.
Yes.
Here in Atlanta, we reached 90 and 95 for the first time this early than any time even recorded. Places all around your tsunamis and floods and hurricanes and forest fires. I mean, the evidence is there.
Well, and the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration released their findings that the last 12 months that we have had, the very last 12 months, so this last year, each month was the hottest month on record ever. And last year was the hottest year on record. And we're going to have to do something because people are dying from extreme heat.
Absolutely.
You also have all this new, you've got droughts to worry with. You also have to worry about, we've experienced some extreme cold situations. We had a winter storm Uri, which is very unfathomable for Houston. But of course, our floods are becoming more extreme. They're more damaging. The storm surge is higher. They're happening more frequently and more intensely. So it's real.
And what we don't realize is that this costs everybody. I was just saw something today before we get out of here. The cost of schools throughout the United States and how they have to readjust and look at air conditioning for schools that never even thought about it. And I thought to myself, we didn't have air when I was in school, but it wasn't that hot.
Right.
By this time, we were out of school before it got that hot. And so you think about some of these schools in some of these areas, these urban areas, they don't have air conditioning, and it's 90 some degrees. And then you can't drink the water because the water is polluted.
Yes.
So these are the things we got to think about. Listen, I want to urge all of you who are part of churches, synagogues, mosques, those of you who are part of fraternities and sororities and civic organizations, be mindful about environmental and climate justice and injustice. Get involved with local politics. If for nothing else, just ask the question, what is your stance on environmental justice? What are you doing to make sure that we have a safe environment? What are you doing to make sure that we have safe air, safe water, safe ground? 3 essential things that we just need to have because it's essential to life. Clean water, clean air, clean ground. We tearing down these trees, and I saw deer out, and it's like they're almost lost, like they've got no home. And I know people probably thinking about, oh, Jeff, you're getting real sentimental, but it goes from one thing to another because Now those deer who are roaming around looking for food, what happens is you see more and more car accidents
Yes.
involving deer, and you crash into one of those, you're going to have some damage. And then who knows what's going to happen after that, what you're going to run into. All kinds of things that taking place, especially when you tear down trees. We're tearing down trees, and guess what? It's tearing up our oxygen. It's depleting us from oxygen. So, get involved. I remember Arbor Day when I was a kid. We went out and planted trees. You got your little tree in the bag, and everybody went out for a field trip, and they planted those trees. Dr. Liza, I can't thank you enough. Dr. Liza Powers, everyone. Come on, let's
Yes, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Special. I've been trying to get someone from the Bullard Center since we started the Dr. Jeff Experience. And tonight we were blessed to have Dr. Liza Powers. She is professional. She's a postdoctoral scholar. Here's her information at the Bullard Center for Environmental and Climate Justice. She's got an awesome background. She's the real deal, for real. So we thank you for your time, and we pray that God would continue to bless you, to have health.
Thank you.
And so keep your mind straight and strong so that you can continue in your studies. And hopefully we'll have Mr. Bullard as a guest one day.
Yes. He would love that.
Yeah, we're going to continue to do what we can to support. Listen, guys, if you get a chance, go out and get Dumping in the Dixie.
Absolutely.
The Race, Class, and Environmental Quality. Great book. I'm halfway through it. And let me tell you something. It's eye-opening. It's not just happening in poor minority communities. It's happening everywhere. And as we continue to fuss and argue about these small, trivial things, the big guys are happy because they're making money doing what they do, affecting how the air that we breathe and the water that we drink. Listen, God bless you all. Thank you for tuning in tonight. Let me see. Let me check comments here. Okay, thank you. Good info. Thank you so much. All right. Okay, others are coming in. Listen, we thank you so much. We always say to our audience, go out, meet needs, solve problems, and save the planet.
Yes.
Save the planet. Dr. Liza, hold on 1 second while we in this stream. God bless you all. See you next Tuesday.